Oh boy, we got Ashes of Malifaux a little bit earlier than I expected, and it is a doozy. But before we get into it, don't worry, this video will not contain any spoilers for any story or narrative things in Ashes of Malifaux, so don't freak out. I'll certainly be covering spoiler-related stuff in the future, but for now, until everybody has access to the book and the PDF is in the wild for a while, I'm not going to be giving any spoilers. Now, over the course of the last 6 months or so, I've been putting out different videos on different topics, and a lot of them have touched on different characters that are coming in Ashes of Malifaux and where we already know about them from the lore. But that stuff is kind of scattered all across a bunch of different videos, and you should definitely go back and check out all those videos because they're fantastic and great and all that stuff. But I thought it would be useful for folks if I did one video that kind of gave you all of that information in one chunk. Ashes of Malifaux has a lot of named characters in it. A lot of the new models that we're getting are specific people as opposed to a sort of class of people, which is really interesting. So if there's a particular character that you're really excited about and there's somebody who already exists in the lore, then this video should be good for giving you some background information about them and kind of point you in the right direction of where you can find out more. But just before we get into all that, I want to say a huge thank you to all of my supporters on Patreon. It's something that I don't say often enough. I really appreciate all the support folks give me, especially the Extremely Cool Kids tier on Patreon. But all the other patrons too, even if you're just kicking in a couple of bucks, it means a whole lot to me. So if you want to support the channel and get a whole bunch of different perks that are available, then check out the Patreon. But if you're not in a position where you can support me directly that way, not a big deal at all. There's a whole bunch of different ways that you can join the community and show your support for the channel. You got the affiliate link below, so if you're picking up the new book, then make sure you purchase it through that link and I get a little kickback from Weird. But even more generally, there's a whole bunch of people who watch this channel pretty consistently that are not subscribed. So be sure to double check and make sure that you're actually subscribed to the channel if you like watching the videos that I put out on a regular basis. But even more than that, if you are a regular watcher of this channel and you haven't joined the Discord, then I would encourage you to set up an account with Discord and come over and join the community over there. I spend way too much time on Discord, not only talking about the lore, but hobby stuff and the game itself and other topics and all sorts of different things. So if you'd be interested in interacting with me directly or hanging out with the rest of the community, then definitely check out the link in the description for that as well. And huge shout out to everybody who is active on the Discord. There's a whole bunch of people that are active on there regularly, and we've gotten a whole bunch of new members recently, and I always love to see new people, so shout out to all of them. Now, let's get into the Ashes of Malifaux stuff. So, I'm not going to go over any of the models who we got our first look at their lore through a Waldo's Weekly article. A lot of this stuff has been teased over the course of the past couple of months, and sometimes they give a little bit of background on who they are in the lore, but if it's a character that we didn't know about before then I'm not going to cover those. You can literally just Google the name of the model, and it'll come up with that article first result. But let's go through them in order here. So first up is the Boilermaker, and we don't know anything about this model as a character from the past, but the Boilermaker's art is actually based on some art that was shown as an alternate for the Rail Golem a while back. Now, Weird threw me a curveball because they put him in the case at Gen Con with a bunch of the other big versatile models that were going to come out for all the different factions, so I was kind of speculating that he would be one of those big 10-point versatile models, but it turns out not so much. But either way, we don't really know anything about him from the lore before the book came out, so that'll stay a mystery for now. Next up, we have the Shadow Lar. Now, this is one that I've not covered in a previous video, and that's because she only became a character in the lore very recently. So if you caught the most recent Penny Dreadful one-shot called One Night at the Star, there's actually a little cameo in there from the Shadow Lar, which is pretty interesting. We don't get a whole lot of detail on who she is as a character, but we get some interesting clues as to what we might see from her in the future. We find out that she's an employee at the Star Theater, of course, working under Colette, but she also participates a lot in some of their smuggling activities and some of the sort of seedier things that the showgirls get involved in. She's got a cool little bag of holding that she carries around, which is reflected in her mechanics in the game, but if you want to know a little bit more about her, then either check out that Penny Dreadful one-shot, or stay tuned to the channel because I actually recently ran that one-shot with a couple of folks, and that should be going up on the channel sometime in the future. Those videos take forever to edit, so I don't know when it's going to come up, but hopefully soon. Alus and Irina are both characters from the Days Without Accident Penny Dreadful. And this is actually one that I haven't run on the channel yet, but I am planning to do so in the near future, hopefully. It's one of the multi-act Penny Dreadful, so it's a little bit harder to schedule those, but we're going to see what we can do. In that story, we get introduced to the siblings, and we find out that Altus is a member of a gang who also has ties to the MNSU, which is weird because they're the good guys, but sometimes that's how it goes. Now, I don't want to spoil too much of the story here, but he is one of the higher-ups within that gang, and he's also trained in illusions and prestidigitation-type magic. His sister Irina is described as being very forgettable, almost to a magical degree, and she has an accident where she loses her limbs, they get replaced by these mechanical limbs, and somehow she's still super forgettable, which is weird, because you'd think you'd remember the weird robot lady with the blade arms, but hey. The art for Jericho Jones actually appears in Ripples of Fate, and it's in the context of a story about Zip, which is interesting because he's not part of Zip's crew at this point. And then we get to Bashe, or Bashe, or however you want to say his name. I looked up a pronunciation guide. This name actually comes from Chinese mythology. It was some kind of serpent that eats elephants, which is pretty dope. But I couldn't find any kind of consensus on how you're supposed to pronounce the name, so I'm going to go with Bashe. So this character comes from the Penny Dreadful one-shot The Hand That Feeds, which I'm planning to run on the channel very soon, in the next couple of weeks. And he is a gator that lives in the bayou in the area around Kythera, and basically he was the runt of the litter, but he somehow survived through sheer luck. And then when the incident went down at Kythera in the story from the first book of Malifaux, he actually got tainted by a little fragment of December's power, and it instilled in him an endless hunger to feed. And as a result of that, he has continuously ate and never stopped eating and has become gigantic. And now he's the terror of that area of the bayou. Now, I'm super disappointed in myself because I actually read that part of the story and knew the background of the character and still thought it was a little too much of a stretch that he would get the December keyword. But here we are, and he is bayou versatile and December, which is super exciting. But if you want to know a little bit more about that story and how it goes down, then stay tuned to the channel because we're going to be playing through it pretty soon. Now, Hopscotch is not a character who already existed in the lore, but I did just want to mention that the concept of Hopscotch in relation to the bayou is something that has already existed. It doesn't seem like there's a direct tie-in here, but there was a Through the Breach adventure called The Dawn in the Bayou that basically revolves around a bunch of gremlins misunderstanding what hopscotch means. They thought it was some kind of brewing ritual that was going to make some kind of particularly unique shine that they were super excited to learn about, and they kidnapped a child because they wanted to learn how to play hopscotch, basically. It was really funny, and it's a typical kind of gremlin-y type of story, but I don't know if there's supposed to be a direct connection with the new model or not. But I thought I'd highlight that. We did play through that adventure on the channel, so you can check it out if you want to. The Ahul, as I've mentioned a few times, has already existed in Through the Breach as part of the bestiary. So we know a little bit about what they are. They live in the bayou, and they're super powerful predators that eat all kinds of different things. And it's based on a mythological creature from Indonesia, which is pretty cool. The Slipstreamer is not necessarily a character that we know anything about, but we have seen this on art that Weird has actually put up at their booths at a couple of different conventions, which is kind of interesting. The Alleyway Echo and Host Dukat are not pre-existing characters as far as we can tell, but they both do have some interesting little Easter eggs that come with them that tie them into the lore in different ways. The Alleyway Echo has an ability called Widdershin's Lane, which is a reference to the first edition story that introduced us to the Library of All Things. And this was sort of a secret area that you could travel through, and it gave you access to different parts of the city. But it's haunted by all sorts of different creatures that could kill you or take you apart or do bad things to you unless you outwit them or defeat them. And in the Through the Breach supplement for the 10 Thunders from Shadows, we actually learned that the Thunders have actually been using Widdershin's Lane as a resource because they found different ways to defeat or outsmart those creatures. Host Dukat also has on him 2 different items that we know about from the Through the Breach bestiaries. We have the Casa Obake, which is a demon umbrella, and then we have the Hushabye Cloak, which is a demon cloak. I don't know what it says about this guy that he rocks around wearing 2 different cursed, haunted items that are super dangerous. But if you want to know a little bit more about what they might have in store for him, then check out From Shadows and From Nightmares, the 10 Thunders and Neverborn supplements for Through the Breach. The Hand of Janice is not a character that we already knew about in the lore, but just in case you weren't already aware, Gretchen Janice is the name of the leader of the Explorer Society, and she's this sort of mysterious figure who has some things about her that we're not exactly sure about yet. So if you want to know a little bit more about her, then check out the Explorer Society book from a couple years back. It's got a bunch of stories in there that touch on a little bit about her backstory and what she's up to. The Clipper is another model that comes from the Through the Breach bestiary, and the art has been updated a little bit, and it looks a lot cooler now. But in Above the Law, the Clipper is described as sort of bat-like, and it flies and shoots pneumatic spikes at people. So that's pretty cool. Although I kind of like that it looks a little bit more like Ridley from Metroid now. Commander Burra is not a character who's already existed in the lore, but we have seen some alternate art for her in the Above the Law Through the Breach supplement, which is kind of an interesting little nugget. Seems like she's into chess and anger, I guess, because she stabbed that table. What did the table do to her? The Propagandist is a pursuit or a class in Through the Breach, which is kind of interesting, but it looks very different from the dude riding a speaker robot like we see in the new book. Probably serves the same purpose in terms of spreading guild propaganda around the city, but I think he got a cool upgrade with his little speaker chariot. Athana is maybe the most interesting character in this book for me. We get a lot of info on her in the From Nightmares book, which is the Neverborn supplement for Through the Breach. She's actually one of the older Nephilim who's been around since the time of Castor and Lorelei, which is Lilith and Nakima's mother. She's got her own living blade, which is pretty awesome, and we know that she's kind of been hanging out in the forest, doing her thing with the plants, and kind of staying out of the rest of the Neverborn politics that have been going on in the past century or two. The Carnivorous Weirdwood is another one that we know from the bestiary and Through the Breach. It's a tree that was kind of infected by black blood and comes to life and starts eating stuff, which is Typical Malifaux, I guess. Delirium looks very similar, though not exactly the same, as the Sinister Insanity, which is from the From Nightmares Through the Breach expansion. It's described as a more powerful version of a nightmare that can cause you to hallucinate, and it can kind of break your brain just from being around it, which sounds super pleasant and not at all horrifying. The giant leech is also very similar to the art that we get for Bayou leeches, which is in Through the Breach, and it describes them as being relatively small, but they can grow to much larger sizes, and it seems like that's probably what's going on here, because these things are pretty giant, as the name implies. Ella Mae Chesterfield is from the gun manufacturing family of the same name. We know about her from a Through the Breach augment that came out a while back, as well as some information about the Chesterfield weapons from various Through the Breach books. It seems that at some point in the past, they didn't play ball with the guild and suffered some pretty harsh reprisals, and as a result, Ella Mae has a vendetta against the guild. And also, she captured a hunter that came to kill her and turned it into her mount, which is pretty badass. The Bad Omen looks like a strange anthropomorphic jackal in a weird way. Kind of looks like Anubis when it's not painted, which I'm kind of bummed that it's not just Anubis, but it's pretty awesome anyway, so that's fine. And in a recent video I did about the upcoming stuff in Ashes of Malifaux after the trailer dropped, I had Swarmlord come on, and he pointed out that this could be a reference to the jackal that follows around Doc Mitchell in the first story that Parker ever showed up in. So if you're curious to know more about that, then check out the story Paid in Full from the Ripples of Fate book. The Keepside Strangers are not a specific thing that we know about from the lore already, but Keepside is an area of the quarantine zone that we do know about. And interestingly, it's the part of the quarantine zone that juts up north of the river, so it's kind of a lot closer to the rest of the slums and the more important parts of Malifaux City. It'll be interesting to see how that ties into all this. Carrie Zotico and the Ferryman, these are another couple of favorites of mine for sure. These guys come from another Penny Dreadful one-shot called The Ferryman that came out years ago. And once again, we've already run that adventure on the channel, so if you want to see the whole thing and how it plays out, then check that out, or pick up the Penny Dreadful one-shot for yourself and read through it. But the TLDR on her is that she was a person who was working for the Miners and Steamfitters Union, and she sort of started dabbling in smuggling dead bodies because she found that it was much more profitable. But she then realized that there wasn't a steady supply of dead bodies, so she decided to start making her own. And the Ferryman was this undead creature that she created to sort of go out and hunt people on the river that runs through Malifaux so that she could harvest more bodies and sell them. She sounds like a really nice lady, and I don't want to spoil anything, but if you play through that adventure yourself, you have an opportunity to punish her for that, so check it out. Ezekiel Gatero, I'm just going to call him Zeke. Zeke is a really interesting one here because he's actually popped up in the lore a couple of different times. Now, he's part of a minor gremlin family that we don't see represented in the game very much at all, except you might be familiar with the Bokors. Now, these are kind of gremlin necromancers to an extent. They live in the area around Kythera, and they have been affected by the grave spirit much more so than the rest of the gremlins. So they've been dabbling in sort of dark magic and all sorts of spooky things. In the Gremlin General story from Broken Promises, we actually see Zeke and his family doing some sort of ritual to try to decide who they should vote for in the democracy where they elected the Gremlin General. And then again we see him pop up in the Bayou book in the story The Anti-Kythera Mechanistum, where Samar recruits Zeke to try to trick the Tuckets into basically jumping in a frozen river to make a bridge for him. It was a really bad plan, and it's kind of funny, so you should definitely go check that out as well as the other story. But the most interesting part here is that he's part of the Resurrectionists, so getting more gremlin representation outside of the Bayou, pretty interesting. Old Hob looks just like a Plague Picker, which is another model from the Through the Breach bestiary. And this was a guild construct that actually went through the quarantine zone and sort of picked up dead bodies to try to stop the spread of the plague. But not sure why it ended up in the Resurrectionists. Guess we'll have to find out. Suzaku is another character that we've known about for kind of a while. It's shown up in a few different places in Through the Breach. I believe the first time was in the Obsidian Gate Penny Dreadful, but we've also recently seen it in the bestiary properly in the Ten Thunders expansion for Through the Breach. Now, they changed the art up a little bit here, and I think I kind of like the old art a little bit better, but what we know about this guy is that it's kind of like a phoenix from Eastern mythology, and obviously it has ties to the Oni and the Beyond. So that's it. If you want to get caught up on any of the stories of any of the characters that are in this book, you can go check all that stuff out for yourself and learn more. Now, the Burning Man might actually be the most important character in the story, so if you want to learn more about him, then check out this video that I did recently, going over the whole origin story and how we got to the point where we're at now. There is a whole bunch more to dig into with Ashes of Malifaux, so stay tuned because I'm going to be getting into all sorts of different stuff. I have a couple of different ideas of the types of videos that I want to do on the new book, including some really special surprises that I'm super excited about, but if there's something in particular that you would like to see, then drop a comment below and let me know. One of the ideas that I've been tossing around in my head for a really long time is going through all the new cards and talking about the different lore references that we get in the abilities on the cards. That's something that I always find kind of interesting, but I'm not sure if anyone else will find that interesting. So let me know if that's something that you would want to watch. So it's kind of been a long time since I did a giveaway, so let's fix that. This time around, I'm actually going to give the winner a choice of the model that they want because not everybody plays every crew in the game. And the options this time around are going to be Misconduct, the alt Auric for the Free Corps crew, or Ulrich Volkov, which is an alternate Guild Steward. Now, if you want to enter for a chance to win, then post a comment on this video or anything I put out in the next month with a comment that includes a flame emoji in addition to whatever else you have to say. And if you are a Patreon member, you can get an extra entry into the contest by posting a similar comment on any of my posts on Patreon. Unfortunately, this is still going to be limited to the continental US. I'm looking for ways to do giveaways that include the rest of the world, but for now, the shipping would just be ridiculous. But in a month from now, I will randomly select one of those comments, and the winner will get their choice of the 2 models. For the rest of the rules on the giveaway, check out the description below. In the meantime, let me know if you've been enjoying the story and the other lore tidbits from Ashes of Malifaux, and if you want to discuss that, as well as the new rules from all the different cards, then hop on over to the Discord and join us to be part of that conversation. Until next time, I want to thank the extremely cool kids here on Patreon, the Steam Powered Scoundrels, Dogmatize, Devin, and the Spilled Paint Pot. And thanks for watching.